All right, now that we're all on point here, now that we know who's in charge, good morning, Matt Waldman. How are you, good sir? Coming off a fantastic Super Bowl 58 game.
Yeah, probably one of the better games I've seen in the Super Bowl for sure. I would think it's certainly a top 10 caliber Super Bowl easily, arguably maybe a top 5. I don't know. What do you think, Bob?
I loved it. I thought, I know a lot of people are complaining. Well, okay, so if you were like many of us in the fantasy industry, forced to turn into betting sharps, which my colleague at Sirius reminded us we're blunts more so than sharps in that regard, right? I mean, but the correlation between player props and fantasy is obvious. And so that being the case, I would have loved to have a mountain of offense, right? I wish this would have been an offensive fireworks game. And, in the end, it was exciting. I thought it was fantastic. I mean, nobody's prop bets came through. Everyone fell short of the expectations in that regard. But in terms of just overall thoughts on the game, I would say great contest. Fine with the outcome. Seemed very unscripted to me. I don't know if they would have made it into the second overtime. Maybe I would think differently. All the entertainment was fantastic. I have no idea. This is going to shock many of you out there. I am not into Usher. I have no idea what was going on with Usher. I am familiar with his, I know him. If I see him, if he walked up to me in the street, I go, "Oh, dude, you're that Usher guy, right?" And he would say, "Yes." And also like Ludacris and the other fellow, is it Lil Jon?
Yeah.
And Alicia Keys. I mean, I recognized everyone. I didn't know any songs, but that aside, it was very entertaining. I thought it was cool as hell. The roller skating, everything. It was, it was like, it seemed like it seems like they're getting the halftime show dialed in. I have seen some people, and I think this is a good recommendation. I'd like to credit them. It was on the X, but there was so much going on the X. It's hard for me to keep up sometimes. But someone said, basically, you should do a 45-minute halftime show 15 minutes of it on the TV and on the screens in the stadium, and show the full 45, stream it later on your whatever your streaming platform is associated with the network. Because it is you're trying to fit a super big production into a little narrow band. The halftime ended up being 32 minutes long, in part because of all the setup and all that. So I don't know that that's ideal, but overall, I thought it was a great experience. It seemed like everyone had a great time in Las Vegas. I have covered many Super Bowls, Matt, from Radio Row, I think about 10 years. And I haven't done the last couple, and I'm perfectly fine with that. I feel like I've, not saying the novelty wears off, but kind of saying the novelty wears off, right? Of the whole Radio Row experience after a while. But it was great seeing a lot of, our friends and colleagues there who have not had that experience as much, really enjoying it. And it seemed like the teams were all into all that portion of it. So I thought from soup to nuts, I enjoyed it. I know this might not be a popular take because people like to hate things, but I thought it was all fantastic.
Hey, look, I appreciate that. And I think that I'm kind of at a spot where I can look at it in two ways, and I think first of all, it's probably best what the Super Bowl is great for on one level. Ultimately, over my biggest insight is probably we should really in this country learn to appreciate art and the arts just in general, in the fact of and not just appreciate the arts in the sense of, because there's a lot of people, whatever side of the political aisle you are on, I really don't give a fuck. Okay, I really care less about either of you who are hard stance on one way or the other. Fuck you to both of you on either side of it. That's kind of how I look at it, and I say that in a kind way while we're having a beer. Okay, but I look at it in the sense of this, is that because on either side of the aisle, whether you're a book burner, which, yeah, fuck you for being that, or you're someone who wants to take their art and their appreciation of beauty and force it down other people's throats and tell them that they're awful people for not liking the same things you like, then fuck you back as well. I think that that's the lesson that we should be teaching in America. And yeah, fuck me for trying to impose that too. But I put it as this, is that really we should be teaching people that to appreciate art and beauty, because when you do that, you appreciate differences and you appreciate the richness of those differences that are available everywhere in the world, and it makes you a lot more just it just helps you grow as a human being and appreciate things for what they are, because what you find beautiful now maybe and ugly somewhere early on in your life may grow to being the completely opposite. So, when I first watched this game, the reason I say that is when I watched the halftime show, there's a part of me, and look, I like Usher. I know all his songs. I certainly, I've certainly have had kids who grew up listening to Usher over and over and over again. So, I appreciate what he does. And I definitely have always liked Alicia Keys, and I've liked some of Ludacris and all of that, so that's cool. But at first I saw this as the old man portion of me now is like, God, America is so much about excess. Everything is so excess. It's like making me nauseous, just like how excess all this is, from like every commercial to all of this stuff. And then there's the part of me that's like, dude, lighten up, Right. I mean, seriously, like it's pretty awesome. A lot of this stuff, the creativity of these commercials are awesome. Some of them are pretty fucking funny. I really enjoyed a lot of all of those things were entertaining. It's just like everything packed in to a level of like it's like a candy bar loaded with like so much sugar you're gonna have a freaking coma. You're gonna be in a coma afterwards.
They've definitely turned it up to 11, right? I mean,
yeah, and it's so I appreciate the 11, but because everything feels like it's got to be 11. Sometimes I'm okay with like a 3 every once in a while.
Well, the first quarter might have been a 3.
The first quarter, but that 3 that was cool about the first quarter was, and when we get to the game itself, I liked that it was a defensive battle early on. I appreciated that there was some. I appreciated that there were some turnovers that were created, and the teams had to battle back from some difficult things. I really felt like no one really lost the game on the level of like horribly screwed up. If there was anybody that I was going to say lost the game, it was going to be Isaiah Pacheco if the Chiefs lost that game. He was the guy who had the worst game with the 2 fumbles. Even if the pitch, you would say, was off a little bit in the first play of the second half. That was the guy I was worried, oh, God, I feel bad for you. But I don't feel bad for anybody. That's what I like about this game.
Dre Greenlaw. I mean, I feel horrible for Dre Greenlaw.
I do. That's true.
I mean, that's crushing.
That was crushing. That was awful.
I mean, honestly, just like one of the worst things I've, just like
that's an
jumping
indignity.
up and down. Right,
yeah.
Right. Just like ready to run out there and kick a little ass, and then boom, the Achilles pops. So but I'm with you. Like so from a fantasy perspective, and forwarding that onto the prop betting angle of that and the DFS angles and all, I want all the offense. Right. I mean, that's, that's what fantasy is all about. And so on that level, maybe I was disappointed that all the happy stories I told myself about this game, how it might play out. And I had various scenarios. My preferred one was a huge Christian McCaffrey day. And I think, he kind of went down the middle lane of that and showed signs of how it could have been a huge game.
Yeah.
And also, I enjoyed the part, some of the outlier guys. I did a whole article on that on Football Guys this week on, which of the outliers should play. All of them, apparently.
Yeah.
All of them are active, right? Or at least a good number of them. Jawan Jennings, great showing. Marquez Valdez-Scantling shows up. Nicole Hardman gets the
Chris Conley on special teams.
Chris Conley, I don't tweet much during the games. I did tweet. I said, I don't believe in revenge game narratives, but Chris Conley is doing his best to convince me otherwise. Those special teams plays were killer. He was knocking it dead.
I was shocked Jim Nantz didn't talk about the Chris Conley, Richie James being starting on opposite teams, angle until the third quarter. But, there was so much to talk about. That wasn't like seriously one of the big things. But yeah, I love seeing that as from a pure football standpoint. From a pure football standpoint, this was a great game. And I loved seeing. I always loved Jawan Jennings just because he is kind of a Hines Ward, Jarvis Landry style of player who it was one of my favorite in that 2020 class because of the fact that he's a hitter. He's just savvy. He plays bigger than
Former
his
quarterback.
size. You know, former quarterback who you could see how that worked out for him.
There's a lot of guys who are former quarterbacks. You know, like what's the saying? You know, you're the best guys on the team are either quarterbacks or the star running back, right?
Yeah.
You know, in high school, and you know, then they kind of filter it out when they get into college. So, just you mentioned Isaiah Pacheco, a little bit of a disappointment. I would tend to agree with that, but just in general, the Kansas City offense, or what you take away from this, and what we should look for going forward based on that.
Well, I mean, I think you know, for me, and I'm just gonna. This is kind of one last overall thought about the game that should bleed into the rest of this analysis, and I'll just say this: is that really what we saw this week was that, you know, the Chiefs. You know, last week when we talked about predictions, I think I said 24-21 Chiefs. And so what wasn't bad. I was about 2 points off, you know, one on each side. But the reason being, and I think I said it, was that the 49ers are the better team, but the Chiefs have key players who, if the game stays close, will be better in the end. And that's essentially because those key players, Patrick Mahomes, Chris Jones, McDuffie and Snead, and Travis Kelce, they all can improvise and they can all adapt and overcome. And as what Tony Romo said that was key in the second half was that Chris Jones is starting to figure out what the 49ers are doing, and he's abandoning what the defensive scheme says and is just playing. And he's just reacting to what's happening and making educated guesses. And at key moments in the first half and in the second half of that game, whenever it looked like there was about to be a big play, Chris Jones shut it down with pressure. You know, there were a couple plays that if he didn't apply that pressure, Brock Purdy probably throws touchdown passes.
And this has been a recurring theme throughout the playoffs. Right? I mean,
and a recurring theme throughout Chris Jones' career.
Right. Yes,
you know,
that as well.
It's like you don't see him for like plays at a time. You know, like you would see someone like I don't want to compare him to anybody else, but you'll see some really good players who it's like they're having a really good game, and it's like they're involved in almost every play. It seems like it's monstrous. Chris Jones is one of those guys where you don't see him in every play, but when it's key plays, suddenly it's like, where the fuck did that guy come from? And it's like, and he does that all the time.
Yeah, there was you know, Nick Bolton quietly had a great game, right? Like it was all over the field. Justin Reed, Karlaftis made some plays.
Yes,
Gay,
Chanel, you know. You know, so I mean,
Chanel.
And then when you look at the offensive side of the ball, I mean, of course, Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce, we've talked about this since October. You know, I know Brandon and Angelo and I did since October, is that what makes a difference with that team is that they're great improvisers. And while the Chiefs receivers have not been strong from a fantasy perspective, the reason why the Chiefs continue to win and play well is that they still have Mahomes and Kelce to improvise and adapt. And football is a lot of that. There's a lot of scheme, but the great players can make those types of adjustments. That's why Brett Favre can, you know, everybody hates now, but, you know, we're going to look back and talk about the player that Mahomes compares to. He's Brett Favre, really not 2.0, but Brett Favre times 2. Okay.
Yeah.
And, you know, and maybe minus certain riskiness. But the thing is what made Favre great is that he could see through all the scheme bullshit, because he didn't always know all the scheme bullshit very well, but he could see through it and find a way to adapt even when he kept screwing up. And I think Mahomes is one of those guys that things go wrong and he adapts, but he has limited mistakes. He's a wiser Brett Favre. That's how I would look at him, with maybe not as hard of a throwing arm, but a more artistic ability and creative ability, more, you know, in terms of what he does. And I think him and Kelce figured those things out, and Spagnuolo and Reed, you know, certainly are adaptable too. Certainly Spagnuolo was, you know, and that was the difference, because you look at the 49ers and it's like Brock Purdy didn't play poorly. No, he played well, but there were
needed a little help with the other line. Could have kept a little of that, and that's credit to Spagnuolo and the players themselves. I mean, they kept him on the hot seat, but I feel like that's probably an area of that the 49ers are going to feel like they need to address this offseason.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that the 49ers are, you look at them, and they didn't play badly either. But what about you, Bob? I mean, what did you think about the Chiefs' offense on this?
I thought it was great. If you're out there and you're in the dirty prop betting streets, Patrick Mahomes came through passing and rushing. Isaiah Pacheco fell short. Travis Kelce landed nicely. If you were out there throwing darts at Marquez Valdez-Scantling, I think his over-under was 19.5 for most of the week, and he hit 20 and got the touchdown. So I think Kyle, there was a lot of guys, outliers that hit their marks as well. On the 49er side, all the primary guys came up short except McCaffrey on his receiving prop. So I don't know. I wish there was more offense. I wish it played out the way I predicted it would play out, so it would not look like a big dummy. But I don't feel like it looked like a big dummy. Nah. Basically, my premise was it was going to be a close game, something similar to what we saw with the Baltimore-Kansas City game, and that Christian McCaffrey would be the difference maker, a couple big Christian McCaffrey plays. Well, he was on path. Yeah. Right. He was one play shy of that being a different outcome, right?
Yeah.
And them scoring, I predicted 31-24. So one more touchdown probably would have got me pretty damn close to my predicted outcome had they won. I think so. Just in general, I think, Brandon, as we're going into the next year, the Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, not great showings, but nothing that's going to alter their value. Right. Uh-huh. I think maybe one of the things we do in fantasy, and I'm a big fan of fuck that, but it's something we do is we remember the last thing we saw. And, 2 years ago, Gabe Davis, was a wide receiver 2 in most fantasy drafts based on a huge playoff showing. I don't think there was any of these huge altering, although I think Isaiah Pacheco, as you mentioned, people will have a little bit of a sour thought in their mind, and maybe you can, leverage that into a little additional value, because I think he'll be fine next year. As a fantasy prospect, probably should be a top 10 running back in your fantasy drafts. Maybe he slides a little bit. He's been going the early mock drafts I've done, Matt. It's been like the tail end of round 2. He might slip into the turn at round 3. That might not be a price that I'm averse to as we get closer to the season, especially if it drops a little bit after this.
And it shouldn't drop because it shouldn't, but it will. But it shouldn't, and I'll tell you why, so that you do leverage this a little bit more, just to add to your argument that you should leverage it, is that it's not like they put Clyde Edwards-Helaire in or Jerick McKinnon in. They told him to hold on to the ball tighter, and they kept going to him. And before the fumble, he looked great. Yes. He was running strong, and then the fumble shook him a little bit, and it shook the team a little bit. But they kept going to him, and they tried to go to him early in the second half. But that's the thing. They didn't take him off the field a lot as a result of that. So that tells you that this team believes in him, and that's an important, that's a valuable point.
Jerick McKinnon's biggest play was pulling the overheated Kelce away from Andy Reid before somebody fell down, and people got even more upset about what they were seeing. People who maybe don't look at a lot of football or understand, who never played football, would have been more upset.
I will say this. I think the best prop bet that could never be made that I would have loved to see that I saw was how many people wanted to pull their hair out when Marquez Valdez-Scantling did exactly what Marquez Valdez-Scantling does. He makes a shitty play, and then he makes a good play. And it's like backwards. And I've seen last year. I remember watching Patrick Mahomes throw a ball up to Marquez Valdez-Scantling, who just made a horrible play on the ball and dropped it. And then Patrick Mahomes went right back to him on the next play, and he caught it. And it was the same thing in overtime, or it was late in the game in the fourth quarter. Yeah. And I'm just like, I just laugh because I'm like, he's going to go right back to him because that's what he does. He knows it's like he's a slot machine, literally, of a wide receiver. And the prop bet is how many people were like the Reese's commercial in the Super Bowl with the caramel on top, who they say one good thing and everybody's freaking out. They say one bad thing and everybody's tearing apart their living room. That was literally Marquez Valdez-Scantling in terms of the Chiefs offense.
So let's just look at the other receiving assets there from a fantasy perspective. Travis Kelce, still a top 5 tight end. Did he push closer to number 1 with a huge game closing performance?
No, I think essentially Travis Kelce is what we're seeing right now, which is he's going to be a reliable part of the offense. He's going to be a key component as the game wears on because he and Mahomes have that great connection. But there are good talents that have caught up to him in terms of how they're going to be used, and he's no longer the dominant force. And it's not because he's older, but it's because the Chiefs don't have another dominant force opposite him. If the Chiefs get Jamar Chase somehow, or a Jamar Chase type of player, or a Justin Jefferson like receiver, or another Tyreek Hill type of receiver to put alongside of what they have, then yes, Travis Kelce could be a dominant player once again. But Rashee Rice is a nice young player, but he's a schemed up wide receiver who's producing well, not a matchup wide receiver at this point.
What if I told you that Rashee Rice in the first mock draft I did went in round 3, at the tail end of round 3, and the current mock draft I'm in, which is in pick 610, he is yet to be selected.
I like the yet to be selected. I'm more on that side than I am on round 3, and it's not because I don't appreciate what Rice did. It's just the Gabe Davis effect once again for different reasons. Is that Rashee Rice produced fantasy-wise, but if you look at how he's used, he's not used a lot in one-on-one matchups where the game is on the line. He's not the Stephon Diggs of this offense. He was the Gabe Davis of this offense. And that's valuable for football, and it can be valuable for fantasy, but it's not reliably valuable for top 5 rounds in a draft, if you ask me.
All right, a couple just semi-related thoughts before we move on to some non-Super Bowl related issues here to close things up today. Chiefs, officially a dynasty. Feel or fuck it?
Oh, totally feel it. What have they won? How many have they won in the past 5 years? 3? 3 in the past 5 years? That's enough. Then
2 in a row.
Yeah, the Steelers were a dynasty after that, at that point, and that was before they won the one, that they won their 4th. So yeah, they qualify. They have just entered dynasty land, I would say. How about you?
Oh yeah, absolutely, 100%. Sometimes the questions are based on single comments. So here's the thing about X, people, right? Like I hear you out there. I see, we were talking on the radio, Dempsey and I, and I think Bender was talking, and they were lamenting, who are they called? The Brads and the Chads and those dudes that don't like Taylor Swift or whatever.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm like taking the bill. There's like 5 of those guys out there, and they're just really loud. Nobody really cares about any of that stuff except like this small little tangle of people. And I think you see the same thing with like dynasty or not dynasty. And so, and to carry that over, the Mahomes versus Brady talk. And so, again, this is a big Twitter war. I saw the best tweet on this, and I'm going to bring it up because it is worth talking about. What are your thoughts on where Patrick Mahomes is at this point?
Okay, from a mainstream media point of view, if I'm going to take that perspective, Patrick Mahomes is one of the great quarterbacks in the NFL. He is not the greatest of all time because he hasn't won as many Super Bowls as some of the other players. His career hasn't played out statistically yet to be on par with the stat collection leaders that you would go look up on Pro Football Reference. If I'm going to take a more NFL insider's point of view, I would take it from that Patrick Mahomes is one of the most talented quarterbacks that has ever played the game, and that he is probably on his way to becoming the greatest of all time.
So and that was my buddy Mike File at Daddy's Home FF on the X device. Mahomes has the greatest start to a career ever. Brady has the best full career ever. We can discuss the rest of what Mahomes has done. Now, he's a big Patriots fan, but that doesn't mean he's wrong here. That means he's, that's just like, rational views of things, people, are something we should like maybe hone in on a little bit. We don't have to be over the top in every single take.
Well, Bob, we can boil down Twitter right now. We're going to have this conversation. We're only going to use 2 words. Fuck you, okay? And I want just do it in a different tone. I'll start. Fuck you.
Oh, fuck you.
Fuck you.
Oh, fuck you.
Fuck you. Yeah, there's Twitter. There you go in a nutshell. All right, unless you actually like don't pay attention to all that stuff and cultivate an audience in a way that you're all capable of being able to do. So I don't really care. I mean, but
all right, Andy Reid. Give me the Andy Reid. Big picture, Andy Reid in the pantheon of coaching talent.
He's one of the greats. I mean, I think top 20 easily, top 10 arguably. But I would put it in that range. I'm going to put it in that. I'm going to keep it in top 10 just because eras are different. I mean, eras of football are different. Am I going to bump like Chuck Noll and Bill Walsh and Bill Belichick?
Those bums.
And, am I going to bump Marty Schottenheimer?
Bill Parcells.
Marty Schottenheimer probably deserves to be in that conversation, even though he never went to a Super Bowl. But the way that they built teams. But I would say that Andy Reid is certainly a great offensive mind, and one of the things that I love about him is that he does build. He has a scheme, but like Kyle Shanahan, he does demand certain things from his players to fit that scheme, and he wants them to be somewhat scheme versatile. But he's also willing to take special talents and say, "Hey, you know what? Let's work around this guy. Let's incorporate elements around what this guy does, because you can't teach this. You can't scheme it. You need that kind of thing." And I would say that Kyle Shanahan maybe doesn't do that as well, or demands more of like the scheme is my thing. He's much more like Kyle's more like the football obsessed, kind of like, as Julian Edelman said on a podcast recently, he was sitting there and he was in a bathroom at a urinal taking a whiz, and there's a guy talking to him about a whip route that he ran, and he didn't know who it was, and he's like, we're sitting here unbuckled doing this, and you're talking about, I don't even know who the hell you are. I'm just trying to get out of here. And then finally he goes, and the guy's like, you don't know who I am, do you? He's like, no. He's like, I'm Kyle Shanahan. And he's like, the guy loves football so much that just out of nowhere, so he's very myopic, focused, intense about what he likes to do.
Right.
And scheme oriented. He's like his daddy. It's like the scheme's more important than the player sometimes, unless you have an absolute great. And that works. Look what, they went to overtime in a Super Bowl, and they've been to how many Super Bowls in the past 5 years? 3. So yeah, he's a great coach. But Andy Reid's more like the guy that's, he was never, I don't think Andy Reid was ever uptight like Kyle Shanahan probably can be, like in that focused way. Andy's the guy who's had a couple of beers, and he's like, he's a little,
and
he's got some perspective and some nuggies, and he's like, all right, so yeah, my scheme's important. This is what we need, but come on, you really think I'm not going to adapt to this? Let me adapt to this guy. Let me figure out.
Also smart enough to know when it's time to bench Kadarius Toney and pretend he's hurt.
Exactly. So I would say Andy Reid deserves, and especially this season, Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes deserve a shit ton of credit for having a guy in Kadarius Toney that, look, I thought Kadarius Toney was going to have a career year. Obviously, that went down the tubes as he was dropping balls left and right. But Brett Veach was like, we think he can be that main guy. That didn't work. Justin Ross didn't work. Sky Moore didn't work. You had all that not working, and they still here.
To the credit of both those teams, though, they realize when things aren't working.
Yes.
Said Trey Lance. Said Kadarius Toney. So hey, we screwed the pooch here. Let's move on and figure out a different path and let the pooch run free.
Yes.
And no offense to the players involved, but it just wasn't working in those destinations. Or in the case of maybe San Francisco and Trey Lance, he wasn't going to get a chance.
Or it was working better. Because...
Right, it was working better. Go back to before the Super Bowl when we heard Jed York saying, that Shanahan pulled him aside.
That's my point.
Said, This is like our number 3 quarterback is our best quarterback.
Yeah.
Right. And we're not going to change our order right now, but he might end up being our starter.
Yes. And people are like, well, then that must mean Lance sucks. But no,
Nope.
you know, this will be my chance to plug the rookie scouting portfolio at 2948 of this podcast, which is that you know, if you read the rookie scouting portfolio on Brock Purdy, then you see what I supplied to his quarterback coach pre-draft about him, and you'll know that he was better than what people were talking about. Now that I think he was going to be a starter, you know, in year one, fuck no, absolutely not. But certainly thought he was better than Mr. Irrelevant as an option and someone who could become a starter, a viable starter in the right system. And you see that if Shanahan saw it, you know that's that's some validation there. So you know you can get your rookie scouting portfolio at mattwaldman.com. If you're an old subscriber and for some reason your password you don't remember it, the password function's a little bit fucked up right now. It's been that way for about a year. You can just email me at mattwaldmanrsp.com. Or actually, mattwaldmanrsp@gmail.com, and I'll get you a new password. It takes me all of like a minute or two to do.
That's mattwaldman.com or mattwaldmanrsp.com to go purchase your rookie scouting portfolio. You'll find all kinds of information there. RSP is where you do the purchasing, correct, Matt?
Yeah, mattwaldman.com.
Oh, mattwaldman.com. Do I have them backwards? I went and looked the other day just so I wouldn't have them backwards, and I still have them backwards.
That's okay. It's all right. It's all those prop bets that you've had to like deal with. You know, that's what's going on.
Let's again. If we're going to talk rookie scouting portfolio, let's talk a few rookies. We have 3 underrated running backs I want to ask you about here. Dylan Laube, the New Hampshire Wildcat. Tell me more.
Yeah, I mean, you look at small school guys and you worry about them maybe holding up well, but one of the great things about the All-Star games that I think is always valuable is when they bring in smaller school guys who spend their career facing people about our size, Bob, as like linebackers, and you go, can they really hold up with big time football? And Dylan Laube is 5'10", about 210 pounds, and watching him at the Senior Bowl, I think that was validation that he holds up pretty well. If you didn't want to look at the tape where he actually faced legit Division I teams, FC, and what you see is quickness, really skillful pass catcher. So if you're looking for an Austin Eckler archetype type of player, Dylan Laube has a chance to be in that archetype. That doesn't mean he's exactly Austin Eckler. It just means that he has some traits that could put him in a role similar to that. So, very quick mover, very efficient, understands how to use his pads. He's not powerful, but certainly someone that can run between the tackles, and he has the weight to be able to handle between the tackles work. So this is a player that I think people should be watching. And I would say that this isn't people are saying this is a shitty RB class, but the people who say that are mostly fantasy wonks, and I'm part fantasy wonk, so I will say it's not the strongest class at the top,
right?
But there are a number of players who can play in this league and contribute and will have value. You're just not drafting them in your top 12 this year. And Dylan Laube is one of those players.
That doesn't mean you won't eventually, according to Isaiah Pacheco, a former 7th-round pick of the Kansas City Chiefs.
Yep.
Let's look at another one. Diajun Edwards from Georgia.
Yeah, I enjoyed watching him. It was the first year I really got a chance to watch him. Very quick, shifty. He was playing with an MCL injury that he suffered in August. He had a huge ass brace on him when I watched him this year. And he could still move very well. He's a good pass catcher. He's got some skills as a blocker that I think are going to be worthwhile. He plays a little bigger than his 200-pound frame. He's going to hold up pretty well as a change of pace guy. Maybe he can give you, kind of like I think of Jalen Richard with the Raiders, where he can give you a little bit between the tackles if you really need it, but he can also play a little more than that. Maybe higher up than that. Maybe he's a little more agile, dynamic version of James White if he finds the right system. Like there's some skills there for him that I'm a big fan of.
You have me at Jalen Richard. George Holani from Boise State.
This guy kept getting hurt throughout his career, but they were like, he had an MCL injury that cost him most of 1 year. Then he had another lower leg injury that Boise State didn't want to talk about that cost him 6 games this year. But when he's on the field, There's a play I was joking on X last or 2 nights ago that Usher may be dancing at halftime, but he's going to have nothing on what Holani did to the top-ranked UCLA rushing defense in 2023 when he caught a screen pass and literally made 7 guys miss in the open field. He's a good pass catcher. He's got some pass protection skills that are good enough that he might be able to grow into a role player in that sense. And I think he's strong enough to maybe add a little bit more weight, and he could become a viable committee back. These are 3 guys that, when I say underrated, they're underrated from a football standpoint. From a fantasy standpoint, I would say Dylan Laube is probably your best shot. Edwards is probably the guy that will be on bigger rosters. And Holani's the guy that's got the most boom bust, kind of like the highest, maybe the highest upside, the biggest, the deepest floor.
Yeah, I think with Edwards, the production coming at Georgia, that's, puts him on more radars all by itself. And so we'll be interested to see how these things play out. Again, get your rookie scouting portfolio. MattWaldman.com is where you purchase. I wait. I want a discount. The discount's over, right? Early bird's over.
You can pre-order now, and you can pay the full freight. And I certainly appreciate you. 19 years. And, my wife's bookbinding right now because she apparently all this is because she wants to get me she wants to do a 20th anniversary set.
I want a hand-bound super Mrs. RSP bound edition at some point. I'm going to demand that.
Well, I hear you. So, well, for everybody else, you might have to pay a shit ton of money for that to happen. I don't know, but I think
I'll even pay a shit ton of money.
Yeah, but yeah, it's gonna be a fun present. But yeah,
Can you actually pick up a physical copy? Can you actually? I mean, is it so many pages? I'm a very strong man.
I think you could replace some of your kettlebell workowts with an RSP glossary.
It's not like forklift.
The RSP glossary. I remember, Bob. I
used to get them the physical copies.
I once decided at one point that I was going to submit the RSP to the FSWA for something, and it broke the suspension on my car. So yes. I decided that this was not a good idea to nominate myself for this type of thing, because printing up and binding it was like a chore. So I just said, fuck it. All
right, let's close this out. Let's close this out with some quick hitters. Feel them or fuck them. Davante Adams staying with the Raiders. Feel it or fuck it.
I'm feeling it now that they got Luke Getsy in there, because Getsy and Adams know each other. Adams is going to feel a little more comfortable. Maybe they'll find a quarterback.
Feeling his fantasy value regardless of quarterback.
Yeah.
Late second round.
Yes, I'm feeling that. That's a good point. That's a good place.
Yeah, he's the price. The price is dropping, and I'm chasing it ever downward every chance I get. I'm feeling cheap Davante Adams. Kirk Cousins staying in Minnesota.
I'm feeling that. I think that they need him desperately, and they may draft another quarterback, but it's probably going to be a while. Cousins can give it another year or two.
Little talk that he might give them a hometown discount. Atlanta might be in the run. We'll see. I mean, Atlanta is going to be kind of the pivot piece here, what they do in their pursuit of Justin Fields. And if they don't pursue Justin Fields,
maybe
then Cousins might be like the ideal target for them. We'll see. I feel Kirk Cousins wherever he goes, though. Guy was quarterback 4 through 8 games this year, and we always are drafting him in double-digit rounds.
You like that?
I'll continue to do that. Giants, the New York Football Giants. They have a kid named Danny Dimes. A lot of talk that they'll draft a quarterback and continue to pay Dimes his many dimes. You feel that?
I do feel that. I think that I think Danny Dimes is not the answer, and they may draft a. This may be the step where they draft like the second or third round quarterback who they give a shot to once they bench Dimes or know that it's time to get rid of him, and then they draft the first round guy.
How dare you? I'm not here for Dimes slander. We're moving on. Ryan Tannehill going to Pittsburgh, where his career would be rejuvenated by one Arthur Smith, with whom he worked in Tennessee.
I'm feeling that just from the standpoint of that he can be the Flacco-like presence for that team, where he can help the young quarterbacks adapt to the system and strengthen that room. and play if necessary. But I don't think they will be taking him to be the starter. They're taking him to be the reserve. They don't have to go. Hope they don't have to go to will help the room.
I feel that as well. But if you want a Flacco-like presence, I'm told Joe Flacco will be available and happy to roll off the couch and come win comeback player of the year if given an opportunity. Trade candidates for Mac Jones. I'll go ahead and say fuck that, but you go ahead and chime in.
I'll probably say fuck that too by the realism of what's going on in the world. But he'll try and work his way up from a backup role somewhere. He'll get an opportunity to be a backup somewhere.
And we'll close this out. Will Aaron Rodgers return to form?
Yeah, he's too obsessed. He's too obsessed with the game, and he's a great player, whether you like him or not. Right. I think he's one of the best quarterbacks that's ever strapped it on, and he's gonna, the Jets. Hopefully, I'd like to see him rebound with the Jets and have a great year or two to close out his career, because you may not take him for advice about things out in society, but you want to see good football players play their best, and I'd like to see him end his career in his best.
Yeah, I don't give a fuck about any of that other stuff I care about on the field, and I do like. There's been a lot of drama associated with the Jets. It feels like to me there are people in certain media outlets that have it out for Robert Saleh, and he appears to have it out for them as well. And there seems to be some really weird vibes going on. I'd like to see the Jets achieve a little bit of success and quiet all the tumult, and Aaron Rodgers is their best path to that success. So,
if they could trade Aaron Rodgers for Deshaun Watson, I would think that would be the most Jetsian trade ever, and it would make me a very happy Cleveland Brown. I'll just put it that way.
I can only imagine. And then Joe Flacco would return, and I would be the happy David Njoku dynasty owner. Yes! All right, everybody. That's Feel It or Fuck It for this week. We'll be back next week. Go to mattwaldman.com to buy your rookie scouting portfolio. Yeah. The rookie scouting portfolio. I'll spit it out. Give me a minute. It just takes me some time. I'm very old. That's a thing, too. All right, everybody. We'll talk to you next week. Love you. Bye.
Love you. Bye.